Look who it is. It's Brooke Siem. Brooke, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Ah, I'm good. You got to be feeling pretty good. This is your second book, right? You have a cookbook, correct?
Yeah.
This is a very different kind of book. There it
Yes.
is. May cause side effects. It's a memoir. This is one that is closer to my heart than you might have known. I
Mhm.
Not that I've ever taken medication, but I wrote a piece for the New York Times once called No One is Broken, based on my relationship raising a kid on the spectrum. And I really feel very strongly about that point of view about what a human being is. And it seemed like that overlapped with the nature of this book, which is about uh, well, your journey to get off of prescription
Yeah.
medication, depression medication specifically. But it did seem to me that something I've always felt about the medication, which is it's difficult. I don't know how you take it and not feel like you're fixing or just propping up a broken thing. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's exactly how I felt for like 15 years. And because it's so baked into our culture that, these drugs, these antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs are as innocuous as taking an Advil for a headache,
Yeah.
people really think that they are being fixed. And if you are being fixed, then by definition, you are also
Broken, right?
broken.
Right.
And I think we're seeing that play out in a very, very public, broken society. Like, people aren't doing well. And I feel like if these drugs were working, we'd have better outcomes because we've
Well,
had decades of trying now.
yeah. And you were prescribed as a teen, and I guess you were part of a generation where that was done pretty frequently. But the circumstances under which you prescribed seemed to me insane that
Mhm.
that they went there. But maybe you can describe that for the listeners.
Yeah. So it was 2001, and I do think that context matters because Prozac had only been on the market for a few years, and
Really?
it
Oh,
was
wow.
really,
It's that new.
yeah, I mean, it was really growing in throughout the 90s as this miracle pill. That's when it showed up on Time magazine, this,
Right.
like the savior and all that jazz. But right around the time that I was 15 years old, that's when my dad died. And so it just was kind of a natural thing. He died, and then obviously that changes how a 15-year-old is. So I was taken to a psychologist who recommended a psychiatrist who said, well, there are these things now, and we think they're safe for kids. So here you go. And it was really early on in the process of medicating children. I mean, it's funny, the two drugs I was on weren't even approved for children and still aren't. And yet I
Wow.
was given them 15 or more than 15 years ago now
Wow.
in 2001. And there was really no thought of any consequences, and there was no research. And that was even still the case a couple years ago. And it's really only been in the past like 1 to 2 years where a lot of pushback is starting to happen. And even the researchers are saying, wait a second, this is not going well. This is a bad
Right.
idea. So it was a very different landscape.
Yeah. And now I should say, I should really actually emphasize, and you do a good job of this in the book as you start off saying, look, this is not doctor's advice.
Yeah.
This is my story. I mean, I have strong feelings, but I also know people who have felt saved by the medication, who have felt like it was a lifeline for them. So, and you obviously have to walk that line because you advocate for helping people deal with life either by getting off or without them, but
Mhm.
you don't obviously, you're not on a mission to abolish them.
I mean, the reality is that would be a fruitless mission. Uh, so I think it's much more productive to look at the landscape as is, which is there are tens of millions, possibly even hundreds of millions of people around these drugs, on these drugs. Not everyone's going to want to be on them forever. We need to find better, safer, more productive ways to get people off of them. And that starts with information. So,
Right. Well, and you made an interesting choice also, and I was kind of curious of what it was going to be when I started reading the piece, because you sort of have an opening chapter where you address the reader directly and sort of say, here's what I'm about to do.
yeah.
But then you go into what I call just straight memoir. You
Yep.
really are just like telling the story, and it reads sort of like a novel, but in the first person. And so, and this is something I coach people, and usually it's around memoir writing. And one of the decisions I think almost every memoirist has to make is, am I writing a personal growth book
Mhm.
or am I just telling a story? Because you could have gone either way,
Yes, I could
right?
have. Yeah.
To
I made
talk
a
about the
really,
choice.
yeah, I made a conscious decision pretty early on in the process that I couldn't do a personal growth book or a pop science book with any kind of authority because I don't have letters after my name. It wouldn't have mattered how much
Yeah.
research I did, how many people I
Yeah.
talked to, like because this is a topic that has to do with
Science.
medical science, yeah,
Yeah.
that it was just a lot cleaner to be able to tell my story directly.
And so, all right. So when you started the book, were you really sure it was going to be a memoir? You just wanted to tell your story, or were you not sure what it was?
Well, it was funny because when I started writing this book, I was actually writing another book. I
Mm,
had an agent from the cookbook I did and I was traveling at the time, and she was like, oh, it was 2017. So she was like, oh, maybe you should like try pitching a travel memoir, about your travels. And I was just kind of like, okay, I didn't have anything else going on.
right.
Like there was some thought that maybe travel memoirs would still sell in 2017. I feel like that's dead now, but maybe in 2017. So I kind of just started writing this other book, and uh it was about the choice to leave my life in New York and to travel, and I kind of alluded to the antidepressant aspect of it, but it just really was about something else. And then that book, that agent, everything eventually went away within a few months when I was like, none of this is the right fit. No one here is the right fit. So I pretty much ditched everything involved. But then I had this draft of something. And
Right.
in the meantime, what had started to happen is I think there was an article in the New York Times that had come out about how it was called Many People on Antidepressants Discover They Cannot Quit. And it was this
Right.
big feature article about this exact problem. And I was kind of like, oh, if the New York Times is covering it, this is a much bigger topic than I initially thought it was. Like, I thought maybe I was like a super rare occurrence, but then I
Right.
realized, no, this is much more pervasive. This is going to grow. That's the real story. That's the book I need to write. And I was
Right.
completely unemployed. So I was like, yeah, sure.
Well, I'm glad you told this story. I think that it's because you've now gone on to do work dealing with happiness. And, it's
Yeah.
funny because I coach writers. I just did a bunch of writers conferences. And really what I do is I deal with their emotional health. And now you've kind of branched into that as well. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I still work as a chef to pay my bills, but I would love to one day be able to support myself doing, talking about this topic or teaching or, consulting or just helping people kind of be better humans and learn the
Yeah.
skill of happiness is the way I like to call it.
But I got one more question for you. And so I want you to think about this. Think about all the writing, just writing, period, whether it's this book or the cookbook or your essays. If writing has taught you anything, it's taught you what?
It's taught me what it feels like to be in the flow,
Ah, ha,
which is really a cool thing to then look at the rest of your life and feel that like I want to spend time with people who make me feel like I'm in the flow, or I want to do entertainment, or like if I feel the way with people or the way I am in my life when the time just goes and I'm so focused and I'm writing, like that's when I know I'm on the right track to something that's good for me.